just as you're becoming part of that community again, you go, okay, now it's time to take off again.
Yeah.
You know, so it's
with
a
every
bit of
gain,
here
though,
and
there's
there.
a loss. Yeah, with every loss, there's a gain.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So,
Hope you don't mind me saying this.
yeah.
But just last week or something was a school awards night.
Yeah.
And you know, to think your kids took a chunk of time away from school, okay, which in, most people's thought was like, oh no, they'll miss out on their school. But was it two or all three of the kids? I'm not
All three of them.
All
yeah.
three of them got the gun award
Really?
at the school. Like, so
a class award.
the
yeah.
class award. They were the best in the year.
That's because
So-
they were the best, because they got to
Their mind was opened.
travel.
Of course,
Yes.
and good schooling and, good
I
parents and all that sort of
totally
stuff.
agree,
But
yeah.
it shows, like, there's a million ways
Yeah.
to do it, I suppose. But
Yeah.
it just shows... here's one for you. Here's one.
All right, go.
Have you ever heard American Rosso?
Yeah.
Yeah? They're comedians
Yeah.
on radio and they're funny guys. Well, I listened to a podcast where the Merrick guy, who's the taller one,
Yeah.
it completely blew my mind. It was on Osher Gunsberg's podcast, right? If you want to hear it, it's the best. Turns out his dad was in advertising. So for
Right.
the first 23 years of his life, his dad would take a month out of the year and take his kids to a different country. And they weren't glamorous countries. They were...
Oh, wow.
We'd spend a year in Afghanistan. Spent a month in Afghanistan. The next year it'd be in Paris or whatever, but always off the track.
Wow.
And so here's this guy, a great success, a really funny guy that can get along with everyone in all businesses, interview anyone. And
Yeah, exactly.
you never would have thought that. He plays the bogan card, but he knows everything about everyone. It's a
Yeah.
beautiful trick, great gift that his dad gave him.
Yeah, I mean, I think like education. I mean, for us, education is great for our children, and every parent thinks that. But I think education just in a school, it's lacks a lot.
I agree.
So, we do intend to keep travelling with our children, and let them experience what's out there in the world. And I guess going back to Islam, I mean, I'm going to get this off my chest. What you hear in the news, it's all bad about Islamic people and all the rest of it. And those are the countries that we spent most of our time in. And I can tell you, they were just the most amazing people and the most generous people that you'd ever meet. And for our children to experience that firsthand, they can turn around now and say to someone, well, if someone's starting to put down someone based on their religion, they can say, well, no, that's not the way it is. This is the way it actually is.
Right.
Or they can, because sometimes it's better not to argue with somebody, but at least they know in their head, like, you're full of shit. I know what the real deal. Yeah. And I think that's what gives kids confidence too, when they actually know that they know what they know.
Yeah.
And also going back to like education. I am a prime example of someone who went to school and still doesn't know that Austria and Iran and China are connected. So that says a lot, doesn't it? And learning comes in all different shapes and forms.
Well, it does. And I think, it's not all about facts either. It's about becoming a complete person as well, isn't it? So,
yes.
Your child might be the smartest kid in school, but could they survive out there in the real world and actually make a go of it? They might be able to, but if you give them all these extra little bits to help them cope, they're just going to be a lot more well-rounded.
Yeah.
Things like compassion, your kids have learnt that, like, oh, I remember that sweet grandma who didn't have much, but she took us in.
Exactly.
And we slept in their thing, and like that feeling of love and how anyone can give it.
And I think, it has influenced them in good ways as well.
Yeah.
They're very good.
And
they do think about people, more, I think,
maybe
maybe than other children,
Just even the different landscapes of each country too is, that if you don't go outside of Australia, you're never going to understand, why people do things a certain way. It's because of their land being so different to ours, you know. I think, like, what's that called? Cultural diversity?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And appreciate things.
Oh, absolutely.
It's freezing all the time somewhere. Like,
So
they know the cold.
Oh, going back to that. So what did you do on the second day? Because your kids' fingers were getting frostbite, right?
Yeah, were they starting to get negative?
No.
Okay.
Kids, you wouldn't really believe how strong children are until you put them into predicaments like that. Of course, you don't want your kids to be crying because their hands are cold and their feet are cold. And, when we originally planned the trip, we didn't really expect it to be cold. We knew it was going to be cold at times. But the problem with that, when we started, that was the end of April, so it was right at the end of winter. And it actually became a bit of a cycle all the way through May. We'd get a sunny day, and then the next day would be overcast, starting to get cold, because you get this wind out of the north from Siberia, I guess. Oh. And it was just freezing. And then the next day, guaranteed there'd be snow coming down. So, that first day we got to this little place. Second day, it was overcast, and that cold wind was coming along, and we got to a roadhouse. And we had lunch there, and then because it was so cold, got more and more overcast, we thought, no, we'll spend the night here. And then sure enough, that night it snowed, and that was like, oh my God, what are we doing?
Was that the first time you thought?
That was, well, it was the only reason, because I woke up because it was like there were raindrops coming down on my head, and the reason was because the wind was whipping up the snow and throwing it against the mesh inside the tent, and then it would melt because there's 5 people in there, and then it would drip down and onto my head.
Okay, yeah.
So, at 2 o'clock in the morning, I got up and I packed all the snow around, so we're basically an igloo, all sealed off.
Yeah.
Got back into bed, and, it was fine. We were still warm. And then the next morning, that was the first time my kids had seen snow. Wow. So it was like actually sort of like a bit of a bonus. They weren't unhappy about it. They were like, oh my God, what's all this white stuff hanging around?
So I just thought of something. Snow gear is massive, to pack snow gear.
Well, that's right. And we didn't really have snow gear.
Yeah, like what kind of gloves did you?
Well, we had basic gloves. We had, half decent shoes.
Sort of leather, but not snowboarders.
No. So, that day, we just spent the whole day at that roadhouse. When we woke up, it was all overcast. It was freezing. But then eventually the sun came out and the snow started to melt. And by the end of the day, it was all gone, just about. But the kids had a blast. They were making snowmen and throwing snowballs at each other. And we had a warm place to go to. And that was what was brilliant about Mongolia, even though that was a roadhouse. Wherever you went, whenever the kids got cold, we could go to a ger and sort of knock on their door. You never got to knock on the door. They'd hear you coming, open up the door and say, come on in.
Really?
All
and these
the
are
time.
just normal, everyday mum and dads?
I think it's really part of their culture because, I guess back, 50 years, 100 years ago, if you're walking away or on horseback heading from A to B and then, a snowstorm comes in, you can't survive that. You go to a, nearest ger and say, can you help me out?
Oh, of course, it relates to the weather.
Yeah, and it's really part of their culture. So, if anyone turns up on their door, any stranger, come on in, have some food.
How accommodating is that? Isn't that
amazing?
Yeah.
Stuff
Absolutely
that we never do on the coast because it's always, you can sleep outside, mate. What are you
doing?
The dog kennels out there.
Yeah, you can.
Get off my doorstep, I'll call the police. That's how we are.
It's completely out of our culture to why would you let anyone in? But we don't have the thought of the weather.
No.
You'd be sort of killing someone. And
it's how we're brought up. Everyone can look after themselves here, really. If you can't look after yourself, then you're doing something wrong, isn't it? Sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
All right. So now a bit of a system starts opening up here. Okay.
Yeah.
We're starting to get to know what we're doing and our mileage and the bike's holding up.
Bike's holding up, yeah. Yeah, unbelievable, actually. They held up the whole way, so...
What was that, Circe, yeah.
Circe. Great bike.
Give him a bit of a plug.
I bought my son a bike and the front brakes broke within... and I'm endlessly repairing them.
Yeah.
Right, well, so you had none of that?
No. So, the guy who built the bikes up, he used pretty decent gear. Or we had a bit of a discussion on what gear to put on. We had the disc brakes, cable discs.
Did you take any tools?
Some basic tools, yeah. Nothing too much. I mean, the only real maintenance I did on the bikes ever was just pretty much lubricating the chain. We had to swap chains, so we had to buy new chains, mainly because we had an adult as the captain and the children are the stoker. But, whenever you got to any sort of pass, the adult's really the one that's driving it forward. And that tended to stretch the chain a lot more.
So even the kids on the back had their own pedals? Were they moving the feet as well?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
And, it was... You really notice a difference.
Yeah.
Absolutely. When you're going uphill, especially.
Sure.
Except for Rain. Little Rain.
Rain? No, yeah. She was sitting on the back minding a little soft toy there.
So when you go from... Okay, when I think of Mongolia, not only do I think of beautiful barbecue, but I think of... I think of like a sort of somewhat of a primitive country.
Yep.
When you say roadhouse, it's definitely not like a BP roadhouse.
No, it wasn't quite like that, but it was, it was a little restaurant.
Okay, so something
you could order decent food.
Mongolian beef?
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? So what you get here from Japan and from China and from Mongolia is just nothing like.
Yeah. So all through China wasn't lemon chicken, honey chicken, fried rice.
Well, of course,
in Southport.
Yeah.
Because we're in the Uyghur area, so we very rarely ate in a Chinese restaurant. It was mostly in Uyghur restaurants, and Uyghur restaurants was pretty much pasta and like a gravy beef sort of thing. It was sort of influenced a little bit by China. So, for breakfast, that was fantastic. China for breakfast, you'd get these steamed buns with chili sauce. So you'd get some veg ones and some meat ones. So breakfast was just awesome. So we pretty quickly learned in China, would camp maybe 5 or 10 kilometers away from a town that's coming up. And then we'd get up really early in the next morning and we'd cycle into town, hit the first restaurant that was open and, eat breakfast. Because, it's so cheap there too.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
You know how in Australia, my mate, through the years of sprint car racing, we'd always get American guys coming over. And every single one of them would say, you guys love your fences, Right. And I didn't know what he meant until I started noticing on TV how in America you have a house, another house, another house. Yeah. And Aussies, we love our fences. We love our border. You don't come into that border,
exactly,
unless you're invited. So I could imagine my inner paranoia of setting up a tent in some part of any one of these countries you're going to and thinking I'm within someone's border somewhere and they may take offense to that. Does any of that happen?
So I guess, Mongolia wasn't an issue because, the landscape's endless. When we got into China, we're basically cycling through desert areas, but where they diverted rivers, it was all irrigated land. So there were crops and, of course, more towns. And, of course, then a lot more difficult to find a campsite.
Yeah.
So there was this one place, we came out of this valley, we'd camped by this riverbed, and there's another little story, and this wild wind came up. It was just unbelievable. Next morning we woke up and there was literally a centimetre of sand and dust over everything in the tent, including us. But it was still blowing a gale. So we packed up and thankfully, because Mongolia, that was the other thing, Mongolia, you tended to get a lot of headwinds. But in this particular place in China, it was like a massive tailwind. So we got just thrown out of this valley. And by the end of that day, we'd probably done about, it was I think it was one of our record days, or record up to that point. We'd done about 60 or 70 Ks. and then we're looking for a place to camp. And just before speaking of other cyclists, we met another cyclist, and